Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Kari. Today I have a really special video because I'm going to be taking you around Paris with me. This is actually the first video in a new series that I'm going to be doing on my channel where I recommend books to Parisian monuments. Now you might be saying, recommending books to monuments, Kari, you do know that monuments can't read. Yes, I am aware. However, work with me here. We're imagining that monuments can read and we're going to be recommending books to them. So today in this first episode, I'm going to be recommending books to 5 Parisian monuments. I'm going to be basing my recommendations on the history of the monuments, what do you do there, the popularity of the monuments, and just the overall vibes of the monuments. And I'm going to be curating a reading list for Parisian monuments, if they could read. So sit back and enjoy this little tour of Paris, and I hope that you get some book recommendations along the way as well. Don't forget to like this video if you like it, and definitely subscribe if you're interested in seeing future episodes in this series. With that being said, let's go visit some monuments and recommend some books. So I couldn't start this new series of recommending books to Parisian monuments without starting with the Parisian monument, the Iron Lady herself, the Eiffel Tower. The Eiffel Tower was finished in 1889 for the World Fair that was being held in Paris that year. Its construction was to celebrate the centennial of the French Revolution, which took place in 1789. The tower was only meant to last for 20 years, but ended up being saved from destruction because a radio transmitter was installed at the top, and therefore the tower became not only beautiful, but useful. The book that I would recommend to the Eiffel Tower is Emma by Jane Austen. Emma is about a beautiful, witty, and rich young woman who believes herself to be an excellent matchmaker. However, while trying to be the perfect matchmaker, she actually ends up making a mess of everything. When Jane Austen began writing Emma, she said, "I'm going to take a heroine whom no one but myself will much like." Which is why I think the Eiffel Tower would enjoy reading Emma, because the Eiffel Tower was not well received by the public, but obviously greatly loved by its creator, Gustave Eiffel. Parisians thought that the tower would be too imposing over the sky of Paris and would ruin the beauty of the city. There's even an urban legend that French author Guy de Maupassant had lunch on the tower every day because that's the only place in Paris where the tower wasn't visible. Another reason I would recommend Emma to the Eiffel Tower is because Emma, like the Eiffel Tower, was considered radically experimental when it was created. Jane Austen shares Emma's distorted point of view, which was rare at the time. We get to see that Emma thinks that she's helping when in reality she's sometimes making things worse. That's why I think the Eiffel Tower could relate to Emma because its construction was equally experimental. The tower is 300 meters or 984 feet tall, which at the time made it the tallest freestanding structure. 7 million people visit the Eiffel Tower every year, and it is the most visited monument that you have to pay to visit in the world. That makes about 20,000 visitors buying tickets every single day, not to mention all the people who admire her beauty from afar. Everyone wants to be a part of her magic. The second stop on our Parisian monument tour is Les Invalides, which is a series of buildings including things such as the French Army Museum, a retirement home and hospital for war veterans, and probably most famously, the tomb of Napoleon Bonaparte. Les Invalides was built in 1671 under King Louis XIV, who wanted to create a home and hospital for aged and disabled soldiers. Later, in 1815, after Napoleon Bonaparte's defeat at Waterloo, he was exiled to the island of St. Helena off the coast of Africa, where he ended up dying. 25 years later, his body was returned to France and he was interred at Les Invalides. His body is actually in 5 successive coffins, which are made of tin, mahogany, lead again, and then ebony. These were then placed in the sarcophagus that we can see in the crypt at Les Invalides today. The book that I would recommend to Les Invalides is A Game of Thrones by George R.R. Martin. If you've seen the TV show Game of Thrones, then you would be familiar with the plot of the first book in the Song of Ice and Fire series, which is A Game of Thrones. Basically, it is a fantasy world where there are 7 kingdoms, aka a place called Westeros. At the beginning of the series, the king of Westeros' hand, who is basically his main advisor, dies, and the king decides to travel all the way to the north of Westeros to ask his best friend to be the new hand. This event ends up setting off a series of consequences. Throughout this whole series, we get the perspective of multiple characters who are in different parts of Westeros. While all of this is happening in the 7 kingdoms, there is also a young woman in basically another country with her brother. Their family used to be the rulers of Westeros before there was a rebellion that put the current king in place. So we follow these 2 characters as well, who are trying to get back their rightful position in Westeros. Basically, the whole story centers around power, prestige, and loyalty. I think the Les Invalides would be obsessed with the Game of Thrones because there are a lot of battles and fights to gain power. Since Les Invalides houses the French Army Museum, that would be right up its alley. Also, since the Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte is a huge part of Les Invalides, I think it would appreciate the respect and importance that is put on sitting on the throne and having all of the power. Next on our tour of Parisian monuments is the Louvre Museum. Before the Louvre was a museum, it was actually a fortress. This fortress was built in the 12th century, but obviously over time there has been considerable construction. However, you can still see remnants of the original fortress if you visit the basement of the museum. The Louvre is the most visited museum in the world, with 9.6 million visitors in 2019. And at any given time, they have over 38,000 objects being exhibited. The book that I would recommend the Louvre is The Secret History by Donna Tartt. The Secret History is about a group of 6 students at an elite university in New England who are studying classic literature and Greek. We know from the beginning that one student in this tight-knit group is murdered. After this brief introduction, we go back in time and see what led up to the murder and then what happens after it. The Secret History is pretty much the original dark academia text because this small group of students is completely obsessed with their studies. So obsessed that it sometimes leads them into very dangerous situations. The Secret History not only has a heavy emphasis on classic literature and Greek because the main characters are studying them, but also because Donna Tartt has kind of created her own novelization of a Greek tragedy with this story, where the characters are forced to accept their fate. I think that the Louvre would appreciate the secret history because the students in the book are obsessed with the classics in Greek history. I think the Louvre would appreciate the dark academia vibes of the book because the Louvre itself has similar vibes thanks to all of its Greek and Roman statues. I also think that the Louvre would appreciate the secret history because, just like characters in the book, the Louvre is no stranger to scandal. In 1911, a man who actually worked for the Louvre stole the Mona Lisa and took it to his house. He literally just walked out with it under his smock that all the workers wore. It took 2 years for the police to figure out who had stolen it. They ended up setting him up and making him think he was going to sell it, and they were able to return the Mona Lisa to her home at the Louvre. The fourth stop on our Parisian monuments tour is Place de la Concorde, or Harmony Square, which is the biggest public square in Paris, at the end of the Champs-Élysées. Today, it's known for having 2 beautiful fountains and a 3,300-year-old, 75-foot tall, and 250-ton Egyptian obelisk right in the center of the square. However, it has also had a really important role in history because from 1792 to 1794, it was one of the public places that the guillotine was used during the French Revolution. At that time, the square was called Place de la Révolution, or Revolution Square. "1,119 people were guillotined in this square, including most famously King Louis XVI and his wife Marie Antoinette. They were the king and queen of France and were accused of neglecting the needs of the public and not caring how poor the living conditions were for their citizens. The year after the guillotine was decommissioned, the square was renamed Place de la Concorde, or Harmony Square, as a way to reconcile the turmoil of the revolution and everything that had taken place in the square. The book that I would recommend Place de la Concorde is Tender as the Flesh by Agustina Bazterrica. Tender as the Flesh is a dystopian novel where humans are no longer able to eat animals because they are ravaged by a disease that is deadly to humans. These humans, called heads, are basically factory farmed and eaten by other humans like it's no big deal. I would recommend this book to Place de la Concorde because this square is no stranger to grisly death thanks to the guillotine during the Revolution. In Tender as the Flesh, raising and killing humans as cattle has basically become so normalized and natural for people in this society, which is really similar to the history of Place de la Concorde because during the time of the Revolution and the guillotine, people would come out to the square in droves, looking forward to watching the beheadings of the day. It was so normalized that people could buy souvenirs, and there was even a famous group of women who came out every day to watch the guillotines of the day and knit between each beheading like it was no big deal. Also, obviously, we can't ignore the fact that the humans that are raised as cattle and tender as the flesh are called heads, and of course the guillotine was used to cut off the heads of its victims, so there's that. Our final stop on our Paris monument tour is the Palais Garnier, or the Paris Opera House. It was built in 1861 and is one of the most famous opera houses in the world. It was built for Napoleon III, and an avenue was built directly to the opera house from the Louvre where he lived. They knocked down everything in the way of this road in order to create a direct path for him. There was also a special entrance and box created for the emperor. Except he never ended up attending the opera because during the Franco-Prussian War, Napoleon III was ousted and exiled until his death. Today, the opera is famous for having ballets and for people performing on the street just outside. The opera is famous for many reasons, among them being the fact that it inspired Gaston Leroux's The Phantom of the Opera. The story is based on a lot of things that really happened at the opera. For example, while a chandelier didn't really fall on the audience, the counterweight which held it up did fall and kill someone. Also, there really is water under the opera house because there is a small offshoot of the Seine River which could not be pumped out for the construction of the opera house. So they just built over it. The Paris Fire Department actually practices swimming in the dark there. The commonalities between things that really happened and things that happened in the book were so similar that people truly wondered if the opera house was haunted. And even on his deathbed, Gaston Leroux continued to claim that his story was true. So while recommending The Phantom of the Opera to the Palais Garnier would make complete sense, I wanted to be a little more creative and recommend The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. The Haunting of Hill House follows Eleanor, who has been chosen to work with someone named Dr. Montague, who investigates supernatural events and tries to find evidence that the supernatural is real. Eleanor and a small group of others have been selected by Dr. Montague because they have each claimed to have experienced something supernatural. He has them all go investigate if some place called Hill House is actually haunted because it is rumored to be. Throughout the book, we're constantly questioning if the house is actually haunted or if they're just imagining it. I would recommend this to the Palais Garnier because, as I previously said, the story of the Phantom of the Opera was based in just enough fact to make people believe the opera house was actually haunted and it wasn't just a story. That's why I think it would appreciate a story that makes you question if the house is actually haunted or if what the characters are experiencing is all in their heads. So with that brings the end of our book recommendation tour of Paris. As I said at the beginning, this is just the first episode in a series that I will continue to do on my channel with new monuments every time, so if you don't want to miss those episodes, make sure you subscribe to my channel. Please like this video if you liked it, I would really appreciate it, and let me know in the comments below if you've been to Paris or if you'd like to go, and let me know if any of these monuments stuck out to you that you would like to visit one of them. I'll talk to you again next time. Bye!